Hey, Pilgrim, it's Steve here, and we have a little bit different video for you today. I've got my friend James Marsh. James is the movie reviewer for the South China Morning Post, which is the English language newspaper here in Hong Kong, as well as for Radio Television Hong Kong. He was on a weekly program where he does movie reviews, and I kindly asked him if we could have a little fun doing a little comparison between the 1984 David Lynch Dune and the 2021 Denis Villeneuve, if I've pronounced that right. Villeneuve. People, myself included, have been waiting for this for many, many years. And so I finally got to see it on IMAX last week, and I believe James did too. Hey, James, welcome to Beyond the Pale.
Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be back.
James, did you see it on IMAX?
I certainly did.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, I'm probably going to go and see it again.
Yeah.
You know, while it is out and while it's on IMAX, I think it really needs to be appreciated that way.
I think you and I may agree and disagree on some categories that are upcoming, but I think we'll both agree that if you have not seen the movie yet, or even if you have and you haven't seen it on IMAX, this is a movie that must be seen on IMAX. Let's dive right into it. We've got the main character, Paul Atreides, the 1984 version, Kyle MacLachlan. The sleeper has awakened. Timothy Chalamet is the Paul Atreides in 2021.
What's in the box?
Pain.
Who wins in this category, James? What do you think?
It's funny because when I was doing a little bit of prep ahead of this, I sort of said to myself, I was like, well, obviously Kyle MacLachlan was too old, whereas Timothy Chalamet feels the right age. So I went back and checked, and they're kind of exactly the same age, the two actors, actually. So I was like, well, that undermines that argument. I think, that said, Timothy Chalamet brings a kind of sort of adolescent petulance to the character that Kyle MacLachlan sort of doesn't. Kyle MacLachlan feels older, even if he isn't. And you know, the guy is supposed to be a teenager. He's supposed to be too young for the responsibilities that are being heaped upon him. And I just felt that Timothy Chalamet really embodied that for me a little bit better. Which is nothing to take away from Kyle MacLachlan's performance. I think it's great, but I think he always, to me, felt a little bit old.
Right. I agree somewhat. I think in a lot of these categories, James, it's not going to be a good bad situation.
No,
it's just going to be
so.
It's going to be just nuance. And for me, I know David Lynch made a conscientious effort to raise the age of his characters, Fade Routh and Paul Atreides, and take them from like about 15 years old to more like 21 years old. And I totally agree. Kyle MacLachlan, his version of Paul Atreides was a little more comfortable in his own skin as any, say, 22, 23-year-old would as compared to a 15, 16, 17-year-old. To me, Timothy Chalamet did a great job of portraying that teenage angst, but sometimes I get irritated with teenage angst, and that's what was kind of needling me in this movie was just, come on, kid, get it together, grow up.
Sure. No, I completely agree with you. However, I think that's sort of an integral part of the character.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah.
I think he is sort of this reluctant hero who has all this, thrust upon him. And just for me, I think that approach. It's interesting that you say that David Lynch deliberately tried to sort of age up those characters because I think that does sort of take something away from the essence of who Paul Atreides is and
Sure.
the journey on which he goes.
Yeah. Timothy Chalamet, though, wonderful actor. As someone I heard comment about him, he seems like an old soul. And I think perhaps that's why, even though maybe he's the same age as Kyle MacLachlan in that role, he seems older than his physicality portrays, if that kind of comes across right, in that he seems like a really young guy when you look at him. His features seem very young, but he portrays a deepness which I think has made him a very successful actor.
Yeah, there's definitely a depth to him as a performer that is quite surprising considering how sort of young he is and how he hasn't really come up through the ranks as a child performer in the same way that some of his contemporaries have. I mean, he's been around for a little while, and actually the more you get to, the more familiar he's becoming, the more you realize, oh wait, he was in Interstellar, and he was in was it called Hostiles a few years ago as a younger actor, but he wasn't somebody that you were aware of as a child.
Right.
And it was only really sort of Call Me by Your Name and after that, when he was already quote unquote sort of an adolescent, that he's really sort of made his mark, and he's got some sort of pretty great range, and I think we're going to see more of that, because I know he's in the new Wes Anderson film, and I think he's in the new Adam McKay film opposite Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio and people like that. So it'll be interesting to see how he's able to sort of break out of this kind of moody, angsty teen mold, and how he develops as an adult performer.
Right. So what's the verdict here, James? Kyle MacLachlan, 1984, or Timothée Chalamet, 2021?
I feel more comfortable with Timothée Chalamet. I must be honest in this particular case. I think he just he sort of fits my idea of who Paul Atreides is a little bit more comfortably.
I totally agree with you, and yet I'm still going to tack just that slight nuance towards Kyle, in that I enjoy his character more, even if you're probably right in that more faithfulness to the book, and that's a category we're going to discuss in a minute.
I mean, at the risk of derailing your carefully planned episode completely, I was curious, what is your background with the novel and with David Lynch's book? Because we are approaching Denis Villeneuve's new film. What baggage have you got? If you like,
sure. Admittedly, and that's good. That's a really good question, because I do have a bias. I grew up with the Lynch film, and I loved it, and I loved the extended versions. If you go online, my player handle on many, games that I've been on over the years, for the last 30 have been Muad'Dib 33.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, and I read most of the original books. I haven't gotten into the newer books written by his son, but to me, the original Dune is possibly the greatest science fiction novel ever written, and one of the best novels written as well.
Similarly, I kind of grew up with the David Lynch film. It's certainly a film that was on a regular rotation just as much as the Star Wars films were. I mean, I'm a little bit younger than you, so I wasn't like aware of it when it came out and go to see it opening weekend or anything like that. But as soon as it hit VHS and TV, it just fell into the regular rotation and became just another one of those sci-fi fantasy movies that were all the rage in like the early 80s. Yeah. And so I was very familiar with it, and that was Dune to me. I came to the book much later. Actually, I'm kind of ashamed to say only within really the last couple of years did I finally sit down and actually read the first novel. And so I think more than the book, the David Lynch version was what Dune was to me.
Right.
And only by reading the book did I realize the strengths and perhaps more obviously the issues with David Lynch's film, particularly in its second half, but I'm sure we'll get to that. So I think that was kind of ingrained in my head, and certainly those performances were ingrained in my head, but I was willing to sort of embrace and accept Villeneuve's vision if it met with what the book.
Let's move on to the dad, Leto Atreides. Obviously, the 1984 version is portrayed by Jurgen Prochnow. I
think I mean, he's German, right? He's from.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to say, but I think it's Jurgen. Prochnow. I think you say it with a V. I think the W in German is a V.
The sleeper must awaken.
Who's an actor I know from, first and foremost, from Beverly Hills Cop 2, where he played the villain in Beverly Hills Cop 2 and was then. And then I found Das Boot later.
Das Boot, I always associate him with Das Boot.
For sure, which is fantastic.
And obviously he's going up against Oscar Isaacs.
There is no call we do not answer. There is no faith that we betray.
An actor who's really made a name for himself in the last decade. And as soon as I heard that Oscar Isaacs was going to play the role, I thought, that is a perfect choice right there, in my opinion. Maybe you disagree. Go ahead.
I don't disagree. I think that maybe he's a little bit young to play Leto Atreides. I mean, I think he does a great job, but there's something in his performance that I think lacked. Well, I don't want to even phrase it that way. Let's put it the other way around. I think Jurgen Prochnow, in his performance, there's a kind of weight of authority. He exudes and emanates this kind of sort of world-weary life experience and unwavering sense of authority and leadership, which I don't think you really got a chance to see in Villeneuve's version. So, for me, in this one, I think Prochnow gave the better performance in the David Lynch version. I just felt that he felt more like a leader, like a king, essentially, a duke. Well, he's a duke, and someone to grow up in the shadow of, because it's all about, Paul's all about, like, I grew up in the shadow of this guy who, who had yet to fully prepare me for the role I'm about to embark on. And I think you feel the weight of that a little bit more in the David Lynch version.
I totally agree with you, James, on this. As much as I was excited about Oscar Isaacs, when I watched the actual performance in the 2021 version, I felt almost exactly what you said, word for word. And that as great an actor as he is, and ever since I saw Ex Machina, I've been an Oscar Isaacs fan. But for me, he didn't bring the gravitas. And you mentioned the age. He's not quite at the age. And something you just said struck me too that I hadn't considered. Jurgen Prochnow portrayed a weariness. I mean, one thing about anybody who knows Dune is a Machiavellian world where there's plans within plans, where there's always backstabbing, where you have on your cabinet a master of assassins. I mean, you have to figure the world that you're living in when you have as a recognized person as your cabinet, the master of assassins. And you could see this weariness in him. And you kind of nailed it there when you said, there's this tiredness. I think you used the word you used, maybe. It's like I'm tired. Whereas Oscar Isaac still had this youthful vigor. Like,
I mean, yeah, when the story opens with the Emperor giving Duke Leto this new responsibility, handing him the stewardship of Arrakis. And I felt in the new version of the film, it was almost like, Leto accepts it with this great enthusiasm, like, finally, this is my big break, almost. And this is my opportunity to prove myself. Whereas there's a kind of resignation to it in Lynch's version.
Yeah, like we're all going to die.
Yeah, I think there's a suggestion that he foresees, the scheming, the fact that it is all a trick, essentially. That there is sort of greater powers pulling the strings, and that he isn't in control, and that probably no good will come from this.
So we're agreed then. Jurgen Prochnow is edges out Oscar Isaacs a little bit.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Lady Jessica, who is portrayed in 1984 by Francesca Annis, and in the 2021 version by the, I believe, Swedish actress Rebecca Ferguson. What do you think?
I think more and more I'm starting to appreciate that Lady Jessica is perhaps sort of my favorite character, like the most interesting character. There's something about the story that the bulk of this sort of quote-unquote adventure that Paul Atreides goes on, he's not sort of at the right hand of his father, being sort of mentored in how this is, in how to navigate all of these situations and how to take charge in these situations. But it's him and his mum, and that's such a rare kind of dynamic for sort of an adventure film. And she's always been a young mother. Their ages have always been not too distant. Sort of the minimum age gap, sort of that seems decent, is basically how their relationship is established. And of course, she's not Duke Leto's wife; she's a concubine, who we learn over time has also sort of betrayed the Bene Gesserit and given birth to a son when she shouldn't have. And so she's this sort of fascinating character to me, and I'm really hard pressed to choose one of these performances over the other. I think they're both great. I think Rebecca Ferguson sort of does a fantastic job, and my understanding is, I think she's stated in interviews that although the second half of Villeneuve's film remains to be even financed yet, I believe, there are plans to sort of make her an even more give the character even more agency and make her an even more integral and involved and dynamic character, which I think she already is. So I'm really hard pressed to choose between them. I think the performances are both great. I think they really tap into what makes her such an interesting character. That she is, she is kind of sort of torn from both sides. Her loyalty to I was about to say her husband, but that's kind of the whole point. Not her husband, but to her duke, but also to the sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit, and also to her son. That she's being pulled in every which direction, in the face of such crazy circumstances, where they're spending so much of their time sort of fighting for their lives in the deserts, in the wilderness of Arrakis. And I think both actresses do tap into that incredibly well. So I refuse to choose one.
Okay, fair enough.
I can't do it. I think they're both great.
I'm going to just leave it rest there, because I don't have a lot more to add than what you just said. I'm pretty much down the middle, other than I would say that maybe Francesca Annis gives that gravitas in the same way that Jurgen Prochnow. Like, there was something where she just seemed to, in just a different, like, she was royalty. Like, she really portrayed royalty in a way that I'm not so sure Rebecca Ferguson does, but I'm not so sure that's absolutely necessary either, given the situation.
Well, this I was going to say. I was like, well, I like the sort of undermining of that sense of royalty, because particularly after Duke Leto dies, Jessica's position of authority and position within all of these powerful entities is really called into question. It's like, who is she exactly? She's not the queen, and she is the son of an heir that she was told not to sire in the first place.
And one of the things that neither movie, in 1984 or 2021, really identifies, but is part of the book, is that she's actually from the Harkonnen lineage. She's actually Harkonnen.
That's right. Yeah, because it's like part of the Bene Gesserit scheme, isn't it, to keep crossing bloodlines,
right? In
order to create the help me out here.
The Kwisatz Haderach. The universe's super being.
Exactly.
I still remember the parody of Dune back in the late 80s with the Comquest Haagen-Dazs. That's one thing, isn't it? There are some very curious names in here. Very much so. Let's move on to the Baron Harkonnen. This is a big central character to the whole story.
Yes.
And we have Kenneth McMillan, who played it in the 1984 version, and then Stellan Skarsgard in 2021. What are your initial thoughts?
Okay, I mean, I think the first thing to say is we don't get to see a great deal of the Baron in the new version. Mm-hmm. Not yet. I mean, we need to bear in mind it's only half the story, and so character arcs are yet to be fully realized. What I will say is that the Baron in the David Lynch movie scarred me deeply as a young viewer. It was one of those movie villains that I was really terrified by. There are some moments of just unflinching brutality in the David Lynch movie, not least when he sort of complacently, non-vindictively, or without really any motivation, pulls the heart plug out of that poor young flower arranger or whatever that kid was supposed to do. And just lets him bleed out in front of him, just sort of patting his head and going, "Oh, there." This guy had done nothing. It was completely unprovoked. It was just a kind of malicious, spontaneous act of power, essentially.
Yeah, and there was also the illusion that there was more than just the macabre bloodletting there going on too. I mean,
sure.
yeah, there was a whole dynamic with the Baron in 1984 that was pretty much overlooked in the 2021 version.
Yeah, not to mention the sort of dermatological issues that the Baron wrestles with in the earlier version, where he has all these sort of pustules and boils on his face that are being constantly tended to and sort of siphoned off and what have you.
Put the pick in there, Pete, and turn it round real neat.
Have you? And you know, and there is a version of that takes place in the Denis Villeneuve one, where that he spends a lot of time in this kind of healing bath of who knows what.
Now squeeze, Rapper. Squeeze hard.
Yes, Uncle. And the vermin.
Kill them all.
But it's nothing like as sort of visceral or grotesque as what David Lynch does. And I think it's one of the more sort of Lynchian elements.
Yes.
Because, I mean, Lynch is a great one for these sort of eccentric, bizarre, sort of almost otherworldly characters, and I think the Baron is certainly one of the most successful realizations of that. So hands down, yeah.
No, I agree that for me the 84 Harkonnens were they were such a macabre evil. They were such a twisted evil. Lynch really knew how to take a few things, and this gets a little off track from the Baron, but even when they had captured Thufir, the Mentat. I don't know if you remember when the Baron says to him, they take this cat that's been deferred, and he has to milk the cat to get he's been induced with a poison, and he has to milk the cat daily in order to get the antidote that will keep him alive. And it's just a little side thing, but it's so visually disturbing.
We brought you a little cat, Thufir. You must care for it if you wish to live. By milking this smooth little cat's body, you receive your antidote. It must be done each.
That
right.
And to me, the 2021 version missed that macabre. There was no scene in which I was visibly disturbed. It was just generic evil. Kill all the Fremen. Why have they taken? Why have they taken Arrakis from us? When is a gift not a gift? It was pretty standard dialogue of evil rather than the visual and little nuances that Lynch gave that made it a truly terrifying race.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think even the other sort of major villain characters, Beast Raban and Peter de Vries, we have yet to really see anything especially grotesque or menacing from them, and Peter de Vries is dead already. They kill him off already in the first part, and Brad Dourif was far more memorable than your man, Polka Dot Man, whose name is I can't remember off the top of my head in that film. So yeah, I think there's potential, and I think we have yet to see everything that is planned for them. At least I hope so, because like you said, there's nothing beyond sort of fairly stereotypical menace and might about the Harkonnens.
At one point, James, if you remember, there was a little macabre spider creature that they had as a pet. And they showed it briefly, and for a minute I'm thinking, they're going to do something really weird with that spider thing, and then they never did. And I thought, what a lost opportunity, because Lynch would have done something with that spider pet that would have left me leaving the cinema going, there's an image I'm not going to get out of my head today.
Well, quite yes. So it really felt like it was holding it all back too much so.
Well, how do you feel about the rest of the cast overall? I mean, obviously it's a huge cast, and we don't have time to break down every verses. But as a general overview, how do you see the general casts comparing between the two films?
Well, I think both casts are filled with, incredibly sort of memorable, striking character actors. I think a few that jump out at me. I think Jason Momoa makes a great Duncan Idaho. Mm-hmm. I think you really, recognize and appreciate him as the kind of frontline warrior that Paul would love to grow up to be, which I don't think you quite got in the. In Richard Jordan's performance in the David Lynch version.
As big a fan of Richard Jordan that I am, I totally agree. Like, I'm a big Richard Jordan fan, but he didn't convey that warrior in the same way that Jason Momoa does. Right. Absolutely.
And obviously Jason Momoa has done a lot of the legwork already in other films. So, the fact that he was casting the character, it tells you so much about the character already going in. You're like, oh, well, it's Jason Momoa playing him. So yes, he's this big growling grizzly bear of a warrior guy. And, but he does great with what he has. Conversely, I think that Silvana Mangano does more, or makes a stronger impression as the Reverend Mother than Charlotte Rampling did. And we all love Charlotte Rampling, but I felt that her scene, her sort of interrogation test scene with Paul, was understated a little too much, to the point where it didn't quite nail the sense of threat and the sense of dread that the Bene Gesserit exudes just by their mere presence, that I felt that Lynch tapped into far more successfully.
I couldn't agree more. I didn't even realize it was Charlotte Rampling until I saw in the credits, and I went, "Oh, Charlotte Rampling is it? What role did she play?" And it's because they put that veil over her face. I'm thinking, when you have Charlotte Rampling in your film, you don't cover her face, and that was my one grievance with that scene and ongoing scenes with her. But the second was, you're right. They understated, they underplayed that scene so much that the original scene carries so much more weight. I kept expecting that, for me, that classic line of, are you suggesting the Duke's son is an animal? Let us suggest he may be human.
This one kills only animals.
Are you suggesting a Duke's son is an animal?
Let us say, I suggest you may be human.
To me, that conveys everything about what that test is designed to draw out. Are you an animal or are you a human? And to me, that was lost in the 2021 version.
Yeah, it's tricky because that scene, almost in particular, is a scene that's lifted almost verbatim from the book in both versions. It's almost like, it's in moments like that where you almost feel like you're watching sort of a Shakespeare adaptation or something, because you're like, oh, I know this dialogue and I know this scene so well. Let's see what they do with it. And so it's all about the performance and the staging, and it's all about the interpretation of it. And yeah, I must admit, I felt the same way. It's one of those great memorable moments, and so as soon as that scene begins, you're like, oh, here we go. I know, this is one of the highlights. And then it never quite felt as threatening, as dangerous. You never really sort of got the same handle on the fact that Paul could die here.
Right.
If he does this wrong, this could be the end. You never quite sort of registered that sense of sort of impending doom in the same way that the Lynch version did.
In both movies, though, I always had in my mind, what was Lady Jessica going to tell Duke Leto when that didn't go the right way?
Right.
I killed your son because of a dumbass religious test.
My cult friends.
He drank the wrong Kool-Aid. Who would have figured?
Exactly. It's because it's such a wonderfully complicated dynamic that is going on, and I think that's why more and more I'm like, oh, Lady Jessica is like the most interesting sort of character, or has the most balls to juggle simultaneously, if you like, certainly in the earlier stages of the story. But yeah, I feel that as yet, in what Denis Villeneuve has given us, you never quite feel the power and the threat of the Bene Gesserit. I think it's fascinating that they are almost simultaneously they've developed this prequel TV show that's going to be on HBO Max called Dune: The Sisterhood, all about sort of the origins of the Bene Gesserit, which I believe they've completely shot and is going to come out relatively soon.
Well, that's good to know, because that would be interesting. I do miss that in the 1984 version, after we get that 2-minute intro from Princess Erlen, the Guild comes in to approach the Emperor. And that's two factions we don't even see in the new movie. We don't see the Guild and we don't see the Emperor. But one of the first, I think the first line to be uttered is the Bene Gesserit witch must leave. Like, it's already conveying the disgust that certain people feel for this cult.
The Bene Gesserit witch must leave.
Leave us.
Yes, my lord.
And also the power that they wield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we whatever we're about to discuss, just we cannot risk having them here. But yeah, I mean, because that one of my enduring memories of the David Lynch version is that disgusting Guild character, which is this big kind of cuttlefish thing in a wheeled out aquarium, and you're like, what is this? And these are the masterminds behind the universe.
We have just folded space from X.
And as yet we've seen none of that.
And this is what Lynch, I thought, did so well, James, is that that whole scene when they roll the Guild guy out and he's in that tank. After the tank is rolled out, there's like slush and water and goop all over, and they're like squeegeeing it up. And to me, Lynch was a master of, they didn't have CGI in 1984, at least anything to speak of. But he really knew how to use gooey, steamy, weird stuff to convey atmosphere. But I thought with 1984 technology, Lynch was able to do a tremendous job of conveying a particular steampunk type atmosphere.
Absolutely. I mean, you look back at Eraserhead particularly, and you can see all of that. There's a kind of sort of tactile sort of mucus and detritus.
Perfect. Yeah.
There's just a kind of gooey unpleasantness to the underbelly of the world, or the shadowy corners of reality. It's like, it's dirty there as well. It's sticky and it's gross, and he really tapped into that in Eraserhead, and even in The Elephant Man, there are elements of that as well. Just sort of the monstrousness of, I was going to say humanity, but it's not even humanity, just of other beings. He is a filmmaker who makes you understand how characters might smell.
Yeah,
and in a way that very few filmmakers sort of would even consider. He's like, this is gross. You know how they feel when you touch them, and what the kind of smell that lingers after they have left the room. And I think that scene perfectly illustrates that.
Yeah, there would be some kind of sulfury, something nasty would be. So well, let's discuss overall faithfulness to the book. 84 version versus 2021. What are your thoughts there?
Well, what I will say is that I think because of the fact that Villeneuve leaves out really any mention, I don't think there's any mention of the Guild. I think there's a mention of the Empire. The Emperor has decided that this is going to happen. But the Guild, I don't think there's really anything. What it does do is really streamlines the setup. And I think that perhaps out of any version that I have seen or read, Villeneuve's version is the easiest to follow in terms of who the players are and their relationships to one another, and what exactly is being unfolded in terms of sort of story. I think in the book and in Lynch's version, there are so many different elements pushing and pulling that it takes a real while before you actually understand what's going on. Yeah. And so I felt that was and is that faithful to the book? No, that's the point. It's like he's torn it away to its bare essentials in that respect. But I think it really helps, bring an audience, and maybe it means it's dumbing it down,
right,
or what have you. I mean, because there are those videos that Paul is watching. It's like sort of Arrakis orientation documentaries or whatever it is he's watching, and as soon as they begin, I'm like, oh, here we go. This is some exposition, and it's quite sort of clumsily, but I think he gets away with it. I think it makes sense because Paul is a kid and it needs to learn this stuff and quickly, and so it kind of makes sense that he would essentially sit down and read a textbook on it, on the place that he's going to. So you're kind of like, okay, fine, you get away with that. But the result is a very sort of effective sort of launch pad into the world of Dune, and so I felt that it's a deviation from the source material, but it actually just helps get you in there faster.
Yeah, no, I think one of the biggest critiques of the original 84 version was that if you were unfamiliar with Dune, it was a big learning curve to understand what was going on, and I agree. Villeneuve streamlined. Let's take the guild out. We don't have to explain why ships are able to do what they do. You take out a whole Machiavellian faction, and yet something is lost in that translation, because when you read the book, there is so many different factions with their own little agendas and their own, and that's what makes this book so good, is the intertwining of, it's not just Atreides versus Harkonnen. There's like 6 other factions that are competing for power in this universe, and but to bring something like that to even a 2-part movie is a tremendous undertaking.
Sure, and obviously in the book as well, it's like every chapter is prefaced by a sort of an extract from, if I want to get this right, sort of one of the Bene Gesserit's sort of teachings or writings from many, many years later, or later, I think. So you know that what you're about to read is sort of ancient history in one regard, but it sort of illustrates that the ripple effects are being felt sort of many generations on by sort of other groups of people.
Well, getting close to the end here. I wanted to add with faithfulness to the book, though. We didn't really close that out. I got ahead of myself there. Lynch really took liberties with the whole weirding modules thing. That I think one of the biggest critiques of that movie was, why do they have these sound guns? I never thought that was as big a problem as some diehards made it out to be, but I don't mind them not being in the movie at all either.
No, I don't have a problem with that, really. I mean, my biggest problem in terms of faithfulness to the book is just generally the second half. And I think it was just more of a sort of practical issue than anything else. You've got Lynch running out of money and losing control of the project. It's being taken away from him by the producers. The studio demanding that it's a 2-hour movie. And I think it tells you everything that his movie ended up being, like 134 minutes and is the whole book. Yeah. In theory. Whereas Villeneuve's film is longer than that and is only half the book. Yeah. There's a real point when, I think it's around the same time. It's around the point where there is that natural break in the book about halfway through, after Paul meets with the Fremen and meets Chani for the first time, and then there is a kind of ellipsis, if you like, in the story somewhat. From that point on, I think in the David Lynch movie, it just feels like it's unraveling incredibly sort of quickly, and you're like, we've got to get a couple of key elements in there, get the daughter in there, get the riding the sandworms in there, and a big battle, and some time in the caves, and it all of a sudden just feels incredibly sort of unfocused and rushed and sort of cheap in a way. It just feels like, let's just do everything in the dark because then we don't have to build any more sets. Now, obviously, Villeneuve has yet to deal with that part of the story, but so far I feel like he is capturing like the tone of the book,
Yeah.
that sense of epic scale, of grandeur. The fact that for the most part, the sort of the character dynamics, the soap opera, if you like, that is unfolding, is happening away from the front lines. It's happening away from the action. I think one of the most daring things about Dune, the story, the book itself, is that a lot of the main characters aren't really in the thick of it for a lot of the time. They are sort of elsewhere, and battles are reported to them, or they come back. They go off to battle and they come back from battle, and there's not until the end are the characters really sort of getting their hands dirty, or are you sort of running alongside them in the thick of it? And I thought that's kind of quite daring for this big sort of space opera, if you like. And I feel that so far Villeneuve is understands that and is going along with that.
But okay, let's move on finally to let's move on to film score. You got Hans Zimmer in 2021 versus mostly Toto. Toto did much of the soundtrack for the 80s version. I think there was a couple other
bit of Brian Eno.
Yeah, Brian Eno, well, yes, I think so. What are your thoughts? Any thoughts on the music and what came out of that?
Well, I think that, I mean, in their own ways, they're both quite effective. I think, the Toto score, and particularly, I think the Brian Eno element of it creates this very kind of sort of dreamlike sort of otherworldliness to certainly to Arrakis, to these sort of vast empty plains of mysterious nothingness. And like I said, because we both kind of know the old films so well, we're so in tuned to those pieces of music, which are slightly melodious as well, that it's difficult to replace them. I mean, I'm a big Hans Zimmer fan when he's on his game, and I really appreciate the fact that his approach to this score, where he actually went out and invented new instruments, because he was like, well, I'm not going to hear horns and strings on the other side of the galaxy. I'm going to need to create something new, and I think it taps into this kind of sort of nomadic Bedouin sort of aesthetic that certainly the Fremen bring to the film. And what you get is this, overwhelming, quite confrontational, quite abrasive score that I've tried listening to at home, and it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. And it's a great achievement, but there's something, it lacks the sort of the tunefulness and the melody that Toto and Brian Eno were able to find, and what you get are just these sort of these choirs and these drums and just these sort of really sort of overbearing sounds. It's a soundscape more than a score, I think, and it's great. And it fits what Villeneuve is doing, but in terms of just appreciating the score on its own merits, I think I'll give this one to Toto. I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought on that, and I would agree with you, because I think the new movie definitely creates an otherworldly feel, whereas in Lynch's version, whether it's a guitar riff or the occasional synth, I'm instantly reminded, oh yeah, this is 1984, and
True. That's fair.
But it's still good music, and I've just been rewatching it because it's on Netflix, and listening to the music as I prepped for this, thought, that's good music. They did a really good job with that. So I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go with Toto on this one, and showing my 80s bias. This is 84 was the year I graduated high school, so I got more bias here to admit. And okay, we're going to wrap this up with final thoughts on visuals and overall atmosphere, and anything else you just want to add, comparing and contrasting the two movies, James.
Okay. I mean, they're both incredibly ambitious visually. I think that in their own ways, I think Lynch and Villeneuve both really sort of went for it in terms of costume design and production design. Building the sets and those costumes are both kind of incredibly very different, but both sort of really, really great stuff. I think, unfortunately, it does show, and I think even at the time, it kind of showed that Lynch didn't quite have the budget he needed. Certainly for some of the grand scale sort of exteriors and the spaceship shots, and obviously the worm shots as well. And so I think it does sort of suffer there. Whereas on the other hand, Villeneuve, there's such sort of an immense kind of reverence for just the sheer scale of this undertaking, and you feel like you're almost at the pyramids, or you're at, the city in Arrakis almost looks like sort of the ruins of a Mayan temple or something like that.
Arrakeen.
Right. You get this sense of sort of timelessness, of weight, of importance and reverence. And I think if I'm completely honest, I think it's at the expense of a sort of an emotional connection at times. I think it's the same approach that he brought to Blade Runner 2049. He's just going to go huge with just sort of the epic grandeur of this universe. But that film, I think, had really hooked into me emotionally. This whole question of sort of humanity and finding sort of importance and finding your calling in life, and does little me have meaning in all of this epicness? And I felt that, dare I say, in Villeneuve's version of Dune, that's what is lacking. Mm-hmm. I never really felt that I never felt that I felt Paul's sort of plight in the same way. I never really sort of connected with him emotionally. But what I did certainly appreciate and connect with was just the size and the scale of the task at hand. And I think that's deliberate. I think the whole world is supposed to feel completely overwhelming to Paul. I think that those early scenes on Caladan, feel more homely and more recognizable, like an Earth world, if you like. It's houses and it's grass and cliff tops and beaches, and we understand this. But as soon as he agrees to leave the planet, as soon as they literally step out of their home into the rest of the universe, it immediately just becomes completely overwhelming, and on a scale that is, overwhelming is my real takeaway from it. So it's intentional, but I think, but I certainly appreciated it, and that's why you need to watch it on an IMAX screen.
Absolutely, you have to. I think for my only critique for the. Or let me just say, I thought one of the things the 84 version versus the 2021 version did better is, in the book, if you remember, there's a lot of inner monologue going. Not inner dialogue, inner monologue going on. People are scheming and thinking and having these internal monologues about people's intentions, their movements, why they're doing what they're doing. And Lynch really gets a lot of that. There's a lot of whispering in the Lynch version under people's breaths, which is almost, eliminated from the Villeneuve version. The one thing I will say is the Villeneuve version, I love the hand signals that they had, because that's from the book, and they didn't have that in the 84 version. I thought the hand signals were perfect. They really communicated, again, the Machiavellian nature of the society that they're in. I mean, this is a place that plants a hunter-seeker like 3 weeks before the handover. A Harkonnen agent, literally on a suicide mission, embeds himself into the wall for 2 weeks for the one moment when the Paul Atreides will be in that bedroom and he can try to assassinate him. I mean, this is what you're dealing. This is the society you're dealing with. And so there was definitely aspects of the new movie that was just phenomenal, that captured the essence of the book. And I totally recommend both versions. The hard thing in this is that I'm not totally sold on one versus the other. The thing I'll leave and then I'll give you the final word, James, is I went into the movie expecting this movie to be better than the Lynch version in every area. And I came out thinking, oh, that was a great movie. But in some areas, Lynch did it better.
I agree with that. And I think that that's sort of the best possible takeaway, because I think the Lynch movie means so much to so many people, and there's so much good stuff in there, yet it is so deeply flawed that I think it's great to be at a time when there is a version that does some of the things that the Lynch version was unable to do, or was unable to do effectively better, yet at the same time doesn't completely eclipse everything in the Lynch version to the point of relegating it to being sort of obsolete. I think what Lynch succeeded at was kind of the minutiae of the world. Like we've talked about, is sort of the tactile gooiness, but also in the details of the costume and in the sets and all the rest of it. I think that's where and the performances, the nuance of these eccentric performances. I think that's where Lynch really sort of comes into his own. Denis Villeneuve is operating on a whole different scale entirely, and so I think it's those bigger moments where he succeeds, where Lynch doesn't have the means at that time to even really tackle effectively. Whereas in those tiny little details, I think, it's very difficult to get past what Lynch was able to accomplish. So I think actually in time, hopefully, what we will see is that the two films will continue both to have a healthy audience, and will actually sort of complement each other quite well. I mean, we just have to now hold our breath and wait that all the ducks are going to be aligned and all the rest of it, and Villeneuve will actually get to finish this, because that is still very much in the balance.
Wouldn't that be one of the great tragic cinema anecdotes for 30 years from now, is when they're doing yet another Dune, and they'll say, remember the 2021 version, the Denis Villeneuve version, which the second half never got made, and what a crime that was. I mean, that it's still in the balance whether they're going to, like you said, that they're going to make the second half.
Sure, the way I understand it, and it's the same studio, it's Warner Brothers as well, is that the deal is struck in much the same way that the deal for Stephen King's It was struck, is that the director has been given like a 2-picture deal, but everything else, especially budget, just remains to be seen. I remember everybody was very surprised that when the first It film did incredibly well, that the second film wasn't immediately rushed into production, that it took they were like, oh, it's done well, okay, well let's start casting, I suppose. As far as I understand, there is a script. A lot of people, all the same people have been working on it, and I'm sure that the intention is to bring back all the same people to do the second one again. But that's quite the cast with quite the busy schedules that you've got to now kind of align, hopefully in the next couple of years, and make it all work. And then you've got to bring all the production, hopefully all the sets are still there and they're not going away, and bring all that production team back again. Like, I know with It, they couldn't get the same cinematographer to do both. I know a different guy did the second part of that, and obviously that had the luxury of a completely different cast, because it was all set like 30 years later or whatever. So yeah, we've got to hold our breath. But if it doesn't turn out to be a success, then I think it could. It's not a dead cert that this is going to happen, and that would be such a shame, because, as I've said, the second half of Lynch's version leaves a lot to be desired. It is unsatisfactory in how it deals with the second half of that book, and for that to happen again just seems kind of such a sort of tragic coincidence of history repeating itself. That I'm nervous, I'm apprehensive, but I'm crossing my fingers and hoping for the best.
If that happens, then the remake in 2045 with whatever director is to come, he's going to approach the production companies and the studios and say, listen, I'm going to start with the second half of the film.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Just do the second half.
James Marsh, thanks so much for joining me on Beyond the Pale, and as always, great having you here and talking cinema. It's my chance to your knowledge is always better than mine, and I love talking cinema, so I'm always getting something good to go back and forth with. To talk
no,
movies.
thanks a lot. It's my pleasure. It's always great fun to come on here and talk to you.
Yeah,
anytime.
Good. Well, as we like to always say on our podcast, buen camino, James.
Buen camino.